Day 26, moving into the last days before Jesus is crucified. And this story comes from Matthew 26. The woman that comes in and breaks a jar of valuable, expensive ointment and pours it on Jesus's head. And the disciples become angry and said, this could have been sold and given to the poor. So we have to remember what's happened. These last days, Jesus has entered Jerusalem to the great fanfare of hundreds, if not thousands of people welcoming him as the Messiah. There's an epic showdown in the temple. Jesus overthrows tables and the money changers. So, of course, there is major rebuttal from the Pharisees, and they are definitely trying to kill him at this point. And so they're exhausted emotionally. They're trying to understand all that's happening because on one hand, he is seemingly following what a Messiah is supposed to do, being welcomed into Jerusalem as the Messiah. But on the other hand, he is saying more and more about his coming death. And so they're probably afraid at this point. Maybe Jesus knows something that they don't. Maybe they're going to kill him in the night. Who knows what their thoughts are? But they are definitely trying to hold it together to keep this revolution going. And in comes this woman quietly, tenderly, breaking a seal and pouring oil on his head. And of course, he says, she is preparing my body for death. And these are not good words. And I can imagine them being just very upset about, and the chapter is called Holy Waste. If he's not going to be king, what's the point? If he's not going to help the poor, then what's the point? And so Jesus is radically redefining what the Messiah means because he is constantly upsetting their definition. Yes, Jesus cares. Yes, Jesus is going to lead them. Yes, he is confronting the religious system, but he's just not going to do it in the way that they want him to. Because he is convinced, Jesus is convinced, that the human predicament requires a much more radical remedy, a much more invasive surgery, which has to do with the cancerous evil entrenched in the human heart. And it cannot just be simply refashioned or remade. It needs a whole heart change. And so the Messiah will bear evil's full force assault, but he will never draw from evil's arsenal of weaponry. He will turn the other cheek, Matthew 5:39. He will love his enemies to the end, 5:44 of Matthew. And he will say, Father, forgive them, all until the very end. And so he will die at the hands of sinners, but it will not be a holy waste of his death, which is how the disciples and followers are interpreting it. No, in fact, this holy waste will actually be his coronation itself. It'll simply be a crown of thorns. And so, even though the disciples are confused, it is the response, and he just starts to touch on tomorrow, which we'll go into, about Judas's response, because he can no longer take the confusion. He wants to take matters into his own hands. And so often we might be able to relate to this too. When our desire to see the kingdom come, which is our desire to change the world, in fact outweighs our trust and love and desire to simply be and stay connected with the King.